California is discussing redistricting. Governor Newsom is trying to do redistricting to get more Democrats elected to Congress. That could lead to 5 more Democrats out of California in response to Texas. Meanwhile, there is opposition to this, and there is a recent survey of 60 to 64% of Californians not agreeing with this redistricting. Our guest today is Don Wagner, who's a county supervisor in Orange County. He's opposing this effort. He's here to tell us what's going on with this redistricting, what's behind the scenes, and what can happen.
If this gets voted for, that is the end of the game for this current election cycle. Those lines will be set, they'll be in the law, and the candidates will then have to run in these new gerrymandered districts for the June primary and then the November 2026 election.
I'm Siamak Korami. Welcome to California Insider.
Pleasure to be back with you.
You know, some big news happening in the state. The governor wants to do redistricting as a result of Texas redistricting. Can you tell us what's happening?
Well, what's happening is exactly as you say. The governor has put together a special election in early November. The idea behind the special election would be to redraw all of our congressional lines here in California. The governor says it's a pushback to what they're doing in Texas. I don't know whether that's true or not. I don't really care because it's the wrong thing to do here in California. What's interesting is the people of California voted to put in an independent redistricting commission. And that commission has been in place now for 2 census cycles and has drawn the lines, drawn them fairly by the lights of the commission. And what Newsom is trying to do is take the power away from the commission, the power that the people gave to it, and take that power and give it to his politicians in Sacramento. The idea, of course, being to draw lines. The governor hasn't released his maps yet, but the analysis I've seen says that there will be 4 Republican seats left in California. Right now there are 9, so they're going to get rid of 5 through gerrymandering. That's what's coming. That's what's on the ballot on November 4th, if the governor gets his way.
Essentially, California is doing this, the governor is doing this because Texas has been doing that, and there's going to be more Republicans, and this is a way for Democrats to have more seats, right?
Well, that's what the governor is saying. But he is, to his credit, saying this is to push back on what Texas is trying to do. Now, I don't live in Texas. I don't know all of the ins and outs and details of Texas. I do know that the Texas governor has said that he is responding to claims from the Department of Justice that the district lines, some of the district lines in the state of Texas, don't conform with the either the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act that they have to abide by. And so he in Texas apparently is calling this election in part to make sure they do comply with the legal requirements to draw their districts. The legality of that is for lawyers in Texas to figure out. Our governor is saying here in California, that's what he's responding to.
How does this redistricting work? How should it work?
Well, how it should work in California is that we've got an independent commission, and it's made up of citizens. It's not made up of politicians, and it's made up of an equal number of Republicans, an equal number of Democrats, and an equal number of independents. And it is their job to go through and draw fair lines for congressional representation. And the way you do that is you've got to start with a balanced population. All of these districts within a very narrow tolerance are supposed to have the same number of people in them. People, not voters, not citizens, just people. And so once you've got those numbers, those population numbers, they also have some other things they're supposed to look at. They're supposed to be contiguous so that you don't have districts stretching crazy across crazy county lines and whatnot throughout the state. They're supposed to try to keep so-called communities of interest together. They've got a bunch of criteria that they're supposed to look at. They've got to conform to the California and the federal Voting Rights Acts. And so they've got to make sure that folks of different ethnicities are adequately represented. They've got a whole bunch of stuff they're supposed to take into consideration. That's the way it's supposed to work. They draw the maps, and then candidates run for election in those districts. Gavin Newsom is proposing to throw all those maps out and redraw maps. We have no idea what they're going to look like, but as I say, the analysis I've seen says they will throw out as many as 5 Republicans, make them safe Democrat districts, and gerrymander the state of California.
Now, there are some polls that are coming out and saying that 60 to 64% of Californians don't approve of this. They don't want it. They don't want it. Do you think there's high chances for the November election to go the way the governor wants?
Well, I think that's a very interesting question. The polling I've seen says, as you say, over 60% oppose the governor's redistricting scheme, and that's across party lines. A majority of Democrats oppose it, a majority of Republicans oppose it, and so it's so far apparently very, very unpopular. Given that unpopularity, I think it's asking a lot of the politicians in Sacramento to in fact call this election, and it's up to them. The governor doesn't get to unilaterally call it. So there is a possibility, and it's my hope, that the cooler heads in Sacramento will prevail. They'll take a look at this. They'll say it's wildly unpopular. The people do not want us to take away their power and use it ourselves, and they won't support the governor. Now, failing that, and if they do ignore the will of the people and call this special election, I think there is a very real chance that it fails. And it fails because it is cynical. It is done clearly for political purposes, and it is very clearly taking power away from the people, ignoring the vote of the people, and giving it to the politicians in Sacramento. That's a tough sell. And so even if the legislature does kind of bow to the governor, the people are, I hope, not having it.
If people vote for this, what will happen? So the power goes to the legislature and stay with the legislature?
If the people vote for this, the maps that will be in front of the people in November will be the ones that candidates will have to use to run for Congress in the 2026 election cycle. And so if this gets voted for, that is the end of the game for this current election cycle. Those lines will be set. They'll be in the law, and the candidates will then have to run in these new, very unfair gerrymandered districts for the June primary and then the November 2026 election.
And what about the future? Would this independent commission stay, or is it gone after this vote?
Now, that's a great question, because the governor says we will only use these new lines for the 26, the 28, and the 2030 election cycle, and then we'll go back to the commission. Now, if you believe that, I have a bridge somewhere I can sell you, because once the power goes back to the politicians, I find it very hard to believe they will give it up. And they've proven that they want this power, or at least if they support the governor in this call, they will have proven they want the power. So does it go back to the commission? That remains to be seen. The governor promises that it will. We've seen him change his mind and do political games in the past. Certainly that could happen this time.
So when it goes to the legislature, we know that there's a supermajority of Democrats in Sacramento. How much voice Republicans have in that, in the calls of these things?
Well, the Republicans have no voice in the actual vote because, as you say, there is a supermajority of Democrats. And if the governor is able to get that supermajority to vote party line, there's nothing the Democrats can do to stop it. The voice of the Republicans would be in doing exactly what I'm doing here and what others are doing or starting to do throughout the state, and explain to the voters very carefully that this is a power grab. This is something done at your expense. This is something that is being done for partisan political purposes to gerrymander the state, when you, the voters, have already said, not once but twice, that you don't want the politicians to draw these lines. You want this independent commission that is put in place by the people to draw the lines. And so that's what voice I think we're going to have to see out of our Republican leadership in Sacramento, Republican leadership around the state.
The lines that are currently drawn right now by the Independent Commission, how fair are they?
Well, I think they are certainly better than what we will see out of Sacramento. The question I've got about those lines is with respect to that you can get roughly 40% of the electorate votes Republican in California. 60% votes Democrat. We are way out of balance, but those are the voters, and you've got to respect that. But what you don't see with these commission lines is 40% of the congressional seats going to Republicans and 60% going to Democrats. It's much, much more than that. There are 9 of our 52 seats. There are 9 of them that are Republicans.
So it's almost 20%, less than 20%.
So exactly, and so they do seem to be out of whack. One of the reasons I think they're out of whack, and I mentioned it earlier, CMOC, is that when we draw lines in California, we draw them based on population, not on voters, not on citizens, just raw population. And when we see, as we did during the Biden administration, an enormous amount of immigration into this country that is not legal, an enormous number of undocumented folks, they all get counted when the lines get drawn. And the result of that is you have unbalanced districts. A district in an urban Los Angeles area, for example, you need very many fewer voters, citizens who are entitled to vote, to elect a candidate than you do, say, in a district down in Orange County where I was running. When I ran in 2012 for the Assembly, it took thousands of more votes for me to get a majority than it did for, say, John Perez, who was the Speaker of the Assembly at the time, from a downtown LA district, because how the population had skewed in those districts. He had a lot fewer eligible voters in his district, though the same population numbers. What's that mean? It means that the voters in a district without a large influx of undocumented folks, their votes don't matter as much because it takes more of them to have a voice and to elect someone. And that sort of thing goes on up and down the state in our urban centers. The result is you get wildly skewed districts, and you end up with 20% of the votes going to the voters who represent 40% of the electorate.
How do they count the population? So if people are illegal, how do they get counted? Because most of the time people are not, they don't want to talk to the government. Are they ending up in the census? How do they get the numbers?
They're supposed to be drawn from the census, and the Independent Redistricting Commission uses the census numbers, which is why they only redraw the lines every 10 years after the census. You get a 2010 census, they redrew the lines in 2012. You get we had a 2020 census, the lines were effective 2022. So that's how it's supposed to be done, which is one of the problems with what the governor's trying to do here is we have no new census numbers. We haven't taken a new census between 2020 and now into 2025. But the numbers are supposed to be drawn from the census. And the question you ask is, well, can we trust the census? It seems to be the best data that we've got. It is true there probably are certain numbers of people who will not want to participate. But the federal government, which conducts the census, does a fairly robust job of trying to find out who is in the country and where they're living so that we can get an accurate census. That's the effort, that's the promise of the census. At the end of the day, you haven't had a new census in 5 years, and suddenly we're going to redraw the lines.
Yeah, there might be some changes to the way we do the census, right? The federal government wants to make some changes.
I do understand that the administration is making some efforts to change some of the census questions to capture that information with respect to undocumented folks and maybe to not count them in the census. I don't have the details of that. And so it remains to be seen whether that will even pass constitutional muster. I know the administration tried it back in the 2016 to 2020 in President Trump's first term, and it was disallowed by the U.S. Supreme Court. So that's an effort out of Washington. I don't know. It's a question that we will face when we see whether they're able to make those changes. and then we'll deal with it in the 2030 census for the 2032 lines. It is what they're trying to do in DC right now is utterly irrelevant to the governor's scheme to redistrict California in 2025.
If the election goes the way the governor wants, is that completely legal, or are there going to be legal challenges coming?
There will be legal challenges to it, and I know several of the candidates have already talked, that are out there on the Republican side, have already talked about lawsuits. Steve Hilton, the candidate for governor, has talked about it. I've read that Carl DeMaio, a member of the Assembly, has talked about litigation. I do expect there will be litigation. The challenge we will have is that the U.S. Constitution is very clear. The time and manner of elections is left to the states. And so it's going to take an enormous effort at litigation to unwind this if the governor's scheme is successful. And the easiest thing is for the people to vote against it, Seema. It's the easiest way to stop this scheme from going forward.
Now, some Californians may want to vote for it because they are looking at this, they're Democrats, and they're looking at this as a national battle. Mm-hmm. And I think the way the governor is doing it, is doing it in response to Texas. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I do think that the governor is saying he's doing it in response to Texas, and maybe that's just very convenient for the governor to do what he'd like to do, which is, number one, get a lot of publicity for his own race for president, and number two, get rid of a bunch of pesky Republicans who are in Congress right now here in the state of California. So I think there are multiple motives going on. For a voter who says, well, wait a minute, I need to do this to respond to Trump, recognize that the Trump situation, he will be gone. We voted him out of office. The public voted him out back in 2020. He will be turned out in 2028, and you are making wholesale changes to governance in the state of California. You are taking power away from the people who said we want a commission, and you're giving it to politicians. And while that may sound great today for this one circumstance, think long term. Because I think voters have a responsibility to think not just what benefits me today, but what is best for my society in the long run, what is best for my family and for my children in the long run. Giving up power, giving it back to politicians, allowing the state to go back to the bad old days of gerrymandering, that long term, I don't believe is in the best interests of the people of California, and I hope they'll agree.
Before we move on to the rest of this interview, let's take a look at the headlines we covered in the Epoch Times print edition this week. The state is moving forward with special elections on redistricting. This could give Democrats up to 5 more seats. There's going to be a special election. Governor Newsom is proposing this to actually counter what's happening in Texas. California is closing one other state prison, has 2,700 inmates in there and 1,200 employees. ICE officers in LA are barred from impersonating as local police in home arrest. This is a court decision. There is fear among the Latino community, even the ones that are citizens. They've told us that they sometimes think they have to have their passports with them because you never know, or they might get stopped. Another interesting story out of San Francisco that you may only see in our newspaper is with the World Transplant Congress meeting in San Francisco. There is a dark side to organ transplantations, and there was a group in San Francisco that was exposing that. There is right now organ harvesting happening in China, in labor camps and prisons, of spiritual believers, people that believe in Falun Gong or Falun Dafa, and Tibetan monks. Now, if you enjoy what you read, this is just the California side of the paper. There's national, international news, and China news with a lot of interesting articles that you may not see anywhere else. If you want to subscribe to our paper, you can click on the link below and you'll get a deal for $1 a week. And you can let us know what you think of the paper. Now we'll go back to the interview. You are deciding to run for the Secretary of State. Can you tell us about it?
Well, sure. I have recently announced that I'm going to run for California, that I am running for California Secretary of State. And this discussion highlights one of the reasons why I think it's worth making this run today. We have an incumbent Secretary of State who was appointed to that position by Jerry Brown. I think the Secretary of State ought to be standing on the rooftops and hollering about how unfair and how hypocritical this is and how wrong it is to take power away from the people and give it to Sacramento politicians. But of course, she's not doing that. There are other issues. The elections in this state, whether or not you believe they are fair, and the majority of Californians are questioning the fairness of our election process. They're questioning it because they see us awash in ballots. We mail ballots to everybody, including to people who moved years ago out of the state of California. The fact is, we're the state that takes the longest in the nation to report our election results. And all of those election integrity issues are, I think, at the forefront of the minds of the voters as we go into the 2026 election cycle. And I think you lay a lot of those, rightly, a lot of those failures and those concerns at the foot of the Secretary of State. I'll give you a couple of, or an anecdote, but several times I've been out on the campaign trail, running for office myself or trying to help great candidates and talking to voters. And I hear from voters almost every time I go out, at least one will say to me, "Don, why should I vote? They're just going to steal it, or they're just not going to count it." Now, I don't believe that is true, that they won't count it. I promise you, the vote you don't cast is the one that doesn't get counted. But what that displays to me is a distrust of the system. Secretary of State ought to be doing everything so that the public feels the elections are fair again. And that isn't happening. I pledge to do it. Last thing on that race. We will see, I believe, on the ballot, the question of voter identification. The majority of states in this nation, 36 of them, have some voter ID procedure before you can vote. California doesn't. In fact, we allow day of voting, no voter ID, and the people, I think, are tired of that. There will be a voter ID initiative on the ballot in November of 2026. It polls overwhelmingly. Again, Republicans and Democrats are in favor of it because it's a good common sense idea that will help us be more certain of the integrity of our elections. And the current Secretary of State not only opposes that idea, but has been one of the members of this administration who has sued cities in California who try to implement common sense voter ID laws. I pledge, if I'm Secretary of State, I will not be suing cities over voter ID. I will be supporting voter ID and suing cities who don't implement it. I want to see voter ID in the state of California. The public overwhelmingly does.
When we've dug into the way the register of voters, they count elections and they count the ballots and they actually match the signatures. This is a sophisticated process.
I can tell you about it and how it works, and it is a very sophisticated and it's a very time-consuming process. And it works a little differently in some ways in Orange County or in LA County than it does in some of the more rural counties where they have very many fewer voters. Here, our registrars are supposed to go match the signatures on the envelopes to the signatures on file with the registration. And the challenges are twofold. The first challenge is, again, because we've got so many voters here in Orange County compared to, say, a small county up in Northern California, Humboldt County or Del Norte County, where they've got a couple thousand voters. It's just very time consuming, and our registrars have to go through those very, very quickly. Even so, it takes 30 days to get results reported. But the other problem with it is that when you sign up to vote, sometimes you're doing it on one of those styluses. You ever been to a grocery store, or whatever, you're signing, you swipe your credit card, you sign out. That signature is going to look very different than one that you do with a pen and ink on a voter registration card. And so it requires a judgment call with a somewhat uncertain technology to determine whether those signatures match. That has to be done in real time very, very quickly. The other problem, of course, is that many people, when they first register to vote, like I registered back in 1981 when I turned 21 so that I could vote. Well, my signature is going to look a little different, now 40 plus years on than it did back when I signed up to vote. Even more so for somebody that maybe registered back in, say, 1965, and they're now in their 80s and still absolutely entitled to vote, and please come out and vote. But Is that signature on a stylus going to look the same? It's going to look different. And so it's a system that is imperfect at best, very time-consuming additionally, and gets solved completely if you've got a robust and fair voter ID procedure in place.
We have heard that for days, when these signatures don't match, they try to call the voters and follow up with them and find them and make sure that these things match. Do you think this is happening, right?
Well, it is happening. I mean, I know here in Orange County, our registrar does a very good job of trying to contact voters and determine whether the signatures are good or not. And the problem is, number one, it takes an enormous amount of time to do that. And just the time it takes
to chase everybody, to find
chase everybody
individually
down and verify those signatures. And it's that time that, among other things, gives people in California pause when they say, well, wait a minute, in Oregon or in Texas or Tennessee, they were able to get their election results 2 and 3 weeks before we did in California. What's going on here? In truth, it's a lot of the time it takes because of our imperfect system to chase those voters down. And sometimes you get a hold of the voters and you can confirm. Sometimes you get a hold of the voters and you can find out, no, there's a problem. Sometimes you can't get a hold of the voters. And what you do with voter ID, I think, is eliminate that period completely. We will get more secure elections and we will get more timely results if we move to voter ID. And as Secretary of State, the thing I am going to want is to make sure that as many people who are eligible to vote in the state of California have an easy opportunity to vote, but that nobody who is not entitled to vote is allowed to vote in our elections.
So you mentioned voter ID, and some people say that that's going to suppress voters. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I think that is just a silly argument. I mean, first of all, you need IDs for an enormous number of things in California, not just to drive, to fly a plane, to purchase cigarettes and alcohol. The idea that it's hard to get a hold of an ID, and not even a driver's license, just a California ID card, those are available. The idea that it's hard to do that is, to my mind, relatively silly. But I will also say there are studies. Don't take my word for it. Look at the other states in the United States where they have voter ID. You have not seen any sort of drop-off in participation. I remember in the state of Georgia back, and I want to say it was 2020, maybe it was probably 2022, the state came up with some more robust voter integrity protections. And the other side complained, oh, it's disenfranchising voters. It's an effort to limit certain people from participating in the election. I remember the Major League Baseball All-Star Game was supposed to be there, so they pulled it out of Atlanta and they took it to Colorado, which ironically has tighter restrictions than even Georgia was talking about. And what did we see after that election? We saw an increase in turnout in Georgia. Voter ID laws do not suppress voter turnout. What they do is make sure that people who are entitled to vote are turning out, that there is less fraud and the elections are more fair. That's what we ought to do in California.
Do you think there is big fraud in California?
To be honest with you, Seemog, no, I do not. I do not believe that there is wholesale fraud in the state of California. What I do think, though, is there are pockets and there are a couple of challenges. I mean, we saw the Department of Justice sued Orange County recently over our election files and was looking to get records from the registrar with respect to who's on our rolls. Unfortunately, the county took the position to say no to the Department of Justice. I say we ought to give the stuff. If we have nothing to hide, we shouldn't look like we have anything to hide. And if we can get some help cleaning our rolls, we should embrace the help rather than try to stonewall it. But it was still only 17 records out of the roughly 1.9 million voters we have on our rolls. And so the numbers of fraud are relatively small because nobody's ever really been able to prove wholesale massive voter fraud. I say that, and I know there's some people on my side of the aisle who disagree with me on that, but that's what the evidence shows to me. That does not mean that people are not concerned. That doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities for fraud with all the ballots that get mailed to us. It doesn't mean that people are feeling that the elections are secure, because, you know, if you get at your home that you've owned for 10 years a ballot from the previous owner who never bothered to change his or her records with the state of California when they moved to, say, Texas or Tennessee, you're going to rightly be skeptical of, not you, because you're not going to go vote that ballot, but knowing that that's happening in the millions around the state of California. And so if we eliminate that, we will eliminate a lot of the concern people have about the integrity of our elections. If we get our elections counted sooner and our results out sooner, that will remove some of the concern people have about, oh, the election changed in the last minute, they must have found or manufactured a whole bunch of ballots. I really wish it were that easy, that it was all fraud, we could find the fraud and root it out. But for us to win races in California, we've got to have good candidates, be on the right side of the issue, and get those messages out. We really ought to start taking a look at a little bit more balance in the state of California.
When you mention clearing the rolls, how does that help for people that don't know?
Well, what we would be able to do if we were to clean the rolls is to take folks who are no longer voters in California. They have moved, or perhaps they never should have been enrolled. They're not here legally, or whatever reason they shouldn't be entitled to vote, and make sure those people are off of the rolls so that they don't get mailed a ballot when the state mails all of the ballots. Now, that's the first thing we ought to stop. We ought to stop just mailing ballots to everybody. But as long as we know that the people on the rolls are in fact entitled to vote in the state of California, then we are going to have, number one, much smaller rolls and have a much better chance of ensuring the integrity of that future election. If we've got just thousands and thousands of dead wood, dead people who don't get cleared from the rolls, people, as I say, who have moved. If we have all of those folks on the ballots or on the rolls, it clutters things up. They're all getting mail. It's just a mess, and it's not a clean way to run our election system. Clean the rolls, get only voters on there so that you assure if you're entitled to vote, you have that chance, and if you are not entitled to vote, by God, you're not going to vote in this state.
You have been serving the public for over 2 decades now. Is it different today versus when you started?
Oh, it is. It is so much different, more different today than it was back in 1998. I mean, you've seen the rise, of course, of social media, and the opportunities of people on social media to engage truthfully or not. And a lot of it is anonymous, and a lot of it is not truthful, unfortunately. So you have seen that, but it's also true that I think we've seen a change in the media to a certain extent. It's become much more partisan and aggressive on a particular side, its particular side of the aisle. And I don't think that serves the public well. My view of the media, the historic view of the media, was that they would find out what happened, tell people what happened, and let the people decide for themselves whether that's good or bad, why it happened, should it happen, do we like the people who are making this happen, do we want to vote for somebody else? And increasingly it's gotten to be adversary and really opinion journalism, which has changed the way politics is done in California, in the United States, in fact. It's also become much more partisan. Much more bitter. I really find that unfortunate. But yes, today is tougher in office than it was, I would say, back in the late 90s, early 2000s. It's very unfortunate.
Was it more respectful, easier to work with the other side?
It was easier to work with the other side. Right now, in part because of the social media echo chamber, but in part right now, there's just a lot of vilification. If you're on the other side of an issue, you're not just wrong, but you're evil or you're on the take or you're getting something for it. There's got to be some reason that you're there. And I have always tried to give folks the benefit of the doubt on the other side of the aisle. What they're doing, I think, is wrong, but by their lights, by their view, they're trying to do the right thing. I hope people give me the benefit of the doubt. Again, you may think I'm wrong in a particular policy position that I put forward, but that at least you respect that it's coming from the right place. We don't see that as much in California anymore as we used to. We don't see that in the United States as much as we used to, and that is a genuine loss. I can argue with the Democrats and the policy positions they're taking all day long. Most of them, the vast majority of them are not bad people doing it for the wrong reasons. There might be a few exceptions to that, but realistically, they're doing it as they see it for the right reasons.
Let us know what you think of the redistricting efforts in California. Do you agree with the governor, or do you agree with our guest Don Wagner? You can always comment or email us. We read all of your emails and comments. You can email us at siamak@californiainsider.com. I'm Siamak Korami. This is California Insider. We'll see you next time.